Hey, everybody. Welcome back to session 3. Well, session 3, if you're not counting the sponsor sessions, which were awesome. I got to sit in on a few of those from Redmond today. And what I saw, you guys were enjoying them. Super, super neat knowledge. And I hope that was really, really helpful to everybody. But for me and for our instructors today, this is session number 3 of day 2. It has been a great day. Hey, Sherry, how you doing? Lots of people here. I see the excitement in the chat box. People, we got people, Australia, all over the United States, again, Pennsylvania, the Ozarks, Tennessee, Oklahoma. So giving some shout outs to Dawn, Angela, Cindy, Liz, Katie, Sherry, Kim, Elise, KC, maybe from Idaho. Very, very cool. Elise from Australia. We've had people from all over the world today. Washington State here. Thanks so much for being with us. And hey, if you've made it to every session, give a shout out. Just give a high 5 or a high 10 or something like that in the audience. If you guys can do that, right? You got emojis. I'm not real sure, but give us a high 5 if you made it to everyone. And if not, don't worry about it. This is a lot of information. I know you can't make it to everyone. A lot of you, and I saw some questions in the chat already. The replays are there for you. There is a link. And it's in your morning email today. It'll be in your morning email tomorrow. So if you're not making it, you're not hearing me say this, but if you can't make it to one, if you missed one earlier, or you got to cut and run earlier during this session, the replays are there for you. We got you covered. And of course, we're going to tell you a little bit later how you can own it and make sure you've always got access to it, along with some really other cool things. So we'll tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later. But today we are talking compost with Noah Sanders. Really, really excited about that. We're going to bring him in a few minutes. Got a little housekeeping to do, though. Make sure you hang out all the way until the end, because not only is Noah going to be talking about compost and specifically how to have compost ready, available all season long. That's something you don't hear about a whole lot, and you need it more than like once a year, right? And how to get prepared for that. But he's also going to be answering your questions. We try to leave some space and get time to questions at the end so that we can address some of you and your specific questions. So we will be doing that, and we'll be doing some of the giveaways at that time. But I want to do one right now. I love kicking it off with a hat giveaway, a School of Traditional Skills hat. And so let me see here, looking for the winner. And yes, if you are here, you're entered to win. So there's 2 ways to win. Some of the things we're giving away in the sessions by actually being at the session. So the hat, if you're here, you're entered to win already, okay? There are some bigger things that we're giving away that as long as you're on subscribe to the summit, we're giving that away whether you make it to the sessions or not. We're doing those, trying to do those from our sponsors once or twice a day. We've got a really cool one from Redmond this evening. But the STS hat, that is Lisa Ham. Lisa Ham, you have won a School of Traditional Skills hat. You can see it on the screen there. Please email hello@schooloftraditionalskills.com, and we will work to get that mailed out to you tomorrow. It's getting late in the day, but I know we've sent out a couple of hats today, so our team is on it, wanting to get those things to you right away. We're also going to be giving away one of Noah's books and a compost thermometer today, a lifetime membership to the School of Traditional Skills, and Redmond has contributed a $500 gift card. Very, very cool. And we'll take care of all of that at the Q&A here after the main teaching session. Of course, I need to say thank you to Redmond. They have been a big part in helping make these sessions happen, to make the summit more robust this year, where we're able to do a few more sessions. They, along with some of our other sponsors, are doing some contributing sessions, and we're giving away over $20,000 worth of homesteading supplies, books, memberships, conference tickets, all that stuff. So thank you, Redmond. I've been using Redmond products for at least 17 years out in the pasture for salt mineralizations for my animals. Very, very important. If you caught that session this afternoon, I'm sure that they talked a lot about that. If you didn't, go back and watch the replay. You will really enjoy that. And if you are not using particularly Redmond salt with your animals, I think you're going to want to start to. And along with the gift card that we're giving away, Redmond's giving everybody 15% off of any order during the summit. I believe that is during the whole summit. So not just today, but maybe you want to go check it out today and find out. So that is in your email. The link's there for your emails, the details. There are also some information at the bottom of this page that you're watching this video on. You can go read that, click it, check it out. It'll open a new page. It won't take you away from the session here. So feel free to check that out and see what Redmond's got for you. And again, thank you, Redmond. Really appreciate Harvey and all of his folks over there on the Redmond team. All righty. I am excited to introduce Noah Sanders to you. If you haven't met Noah yet, he is a wealth of knowledge and passion for sharing his knowledge. He is a homesteader, among other things, in Alabama, as well as an amazing husband and dad and a teacher. And he studied all over the world. In fact, this compost method that he is talking about this evening and that he talks about in his class at the School of Traditional Skills, he learned while in Zimbabwe, where it was survival for them. It was survival for them to produce healthy soil, to produce the food that they needed. And I think we're not in a lot of their shoes, but it's becoming more and more important and feeling more and more like survival for us to start to lessen our dependence on other systems and provide for ourselves. And so this is just a great system that he's learned and developed. It's simple, it's basic, but it's highly effective at creating beautiful, rich, living compost that will help your garden turn into a lush, thriving garden. And yet it requires no special tools or equipment or materials, just basic farm implements like a shovel and a pitchfork, some water, and materials that you can generally collect from around your property or in your community. So this is also low cost. I love that when we can bring all of these elements together. And, I got to film, I got to be there for the filming of Noah's class. I learned some things. I've been composting for a long time. I learned some things that I instituted into my composting, and we challenged thousands of people at the school this year to make compost Noah's way. And they did it, and it worked for them, from people in urban backyards to people with larger farms. It was very applicable. It's very scalable. And following Noah's instructions, many people, I forgot, Bo, our community manager, figured out how many tons of compost that we made across the country and probably some other places in the world. And it was just amazing and a fun journey this summer that we had together. And I'll tell you more how you can be part of things like that a little bit later. But once you learn his system and see what his compost can do for your garden, you're going to continue to make it, and you're going to want to share it with others. So I'm thankful to have Noah with us here today. Noah, welcome. Glad to have you. How you doing today?
Good. So glad to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. You're coming to us from Alabama. How's the weather down there in Alabama? Are you getting past the summer heat yet?
Well, I was thinking we were still in the middle of the summer heat. This is Alabama weather for you. Okay. So it's supposed to be sunny all day, a little partly cloudy in the afternoon, no chance of rain. So I go and get 13 round bales of hay for my neighbor this morning, drop them off in the pasture to put underneath the barn after lunch, sit down for lunch, and the bottom drops out. You look on the radar, there's like a teeny little bitty rain cloud, like one speck on the radar. so it's been raining out this afternoon, which it wasn't actually on the forecast. So it feels pretty good now after a little bit of a dry spell, but I wish I had known it about an hour before so I could have gotten all those bales in the barn. So yeah, thankfully we can make compost out of them. So yeah.
Well, there you go. You'll have enough compost maybe to put on the pasture with that many bales. So hopefully you can give them just beef cows or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll eat some of them, but yeah. So we're enjoying the gearing up for the fall and feeling those first few cool days come in and setting out some of our fall garden.
That's so nice. Your summer for you is like winter for us, right? Summer for you is where you kind of shelter inside a little bit more in Alabama there, where for us that's the winter time.
It is.
Yeah, real good. Family doing well? Everybody doing well there on the homestead?
Yep, everybody's doing great and really stepping up to help with things around the farm. And it's one of those things that's neat to see as your kids get a little bit older. Our oldest is 12 now,
Mm.
And this afternoon we had to get the hay in unexpectedly, and we had some things come up, and so I was looking down. It was about a half hour till we had to get on here, and I said, I'm going to set you up to milk the cow by yourself, which he hasn't fully done yet. So he's been up there while we're on here, and has been taking over the garden, and other kids have been stepping up to do different things. And it's harder to try to teach kids initially than just to do it yourself. But
Oh man.
I had to remember, like, look, no, you got into this to do this with your family, right?
Yep.
So do it, and
Yep.
you think you know it, but just sometimes you got to wake up sometimes and realize now is the time
Yeah.
to do it, and then to see that pay off after a while is just been a real joy.
And of course, we've got to be willing to let go, right? And realize that they're not going to do it the way we do it right away, if at all, sometimes depending on their personality. And that's been a part of our journey of learning and shepherding kids, because we set out exactly what you're saying to teach them and to pass that off to them and to do it with them. And so we've got to allow them to step out there and go for it. Even maybe we're not ready yet. Maybe they're not ready yet. But they learn in that, doing a little bit of that freedom, taking on the freedom, take on some of that responsibility. And we're not right there. So those moments can be challenging, but they're precious too.
It is. It's and God is very gracious even in the midst of that. There's time that our big 6x6 greenhouse window at the end of our house, that little sunroom we have, one of the boys was learning to drive the tractor, and he was being so careful, but he wasn't watching that front end loader, and it scraped a line all the way across the front of that window, put pressure. And if he had turned it just one wrong way, it would have popped the whole thing. And he eased off of it. But you watch that from a distance and you're thinking, there goes the window, man, But now I can see the scratch, and that's all. We still have the window there. So you have all those.
Well, that's a love scratch. Might be frustrating in the moment, but that's a love scratch. Have you ever had it where you've had somebody do something like that? And maybe when they're a little bit older and I scold them a little bit, like, hey, you need to be paying attention a little bit better. And then I turn around and with a day or two, go ding something up or bump into something. And they're like, Dad. Yeah, well, I guess we're all human. Got to have grace.
It is. It's not about the homestead. It's about the people that you're doing it with. And we have to remember that every day.
Amen. It is about the people you're with and the journey we're on together, right? I mean, we are trying to get somewhere. We are trying to accomplish some things, but the people are first, and we gotta work to do it together.
And learn to just laugh.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, good thoughts. And we are here to talk about compost today, not specifically about how to make compost. I'm sure we'll touch on little bits and pieces of that, but the strategy about how to have it when you need it. And that leans into mindsets, and really just in this subject alone, it's a mindset that is applicable across the homesteading life. Right. But before we get into that, for those that haven't met you before, there's a lot of people here that may not know who you are. Can you give us an overview of why composting is so important to you, that you take so much of your time to share it with others? And I know for you, it's a part of a bigger picture as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about why you're teaching compost, why you're here, and what you do, elsewhere that leads into this.
Yeah. So I did not grow up farming. I come from a farming heritage, but my dad didn't farm. And so when I was learning to grow food and ended up having a market garden where we made our living selling vegetables, organic vegetables to people, I was kind of starting from scratch, and you kind of dive into all the different cool techniques and systems that you could use. But at the end of the day, the compost system that I learned from my friends in Africa was the simplest, most effective foundation for providing soil fertility for our farm. And we have Alabama red clay. I mean, it's not like we're in the Midwest where we've got black soil already. And it was interesting because I posted a picture of my son planting a bed yesterday, and some family members were like, man, that soil is so black, but it's that compost we're putting on there, And I think the compost is important to me because, one, I want my food that I grow myself to be something that I can do without purchasing outside inputs. So I want to be able to produce my own fertilizer, not just buy organic fertilizer. I want to be able to produce it on my farm. I also want to be building soil health so that our food is nutritious as possible. And we teach a lot of people that are in environments where they're starting at a place of poverty. And we want to give them options for building soil, for growing healthy food that doesn't cost a lot of money. And the nice thing is compost can be made out of, the weeds out of your neighbor's field if you want to, and typically things that people throw away. And so that's why we're really passionate, even though I like and have studied things like Korean natural farming and other amazing natural soil fertility techniques. I think compost is a really, really great, it's an important starting place for anybody that's going to begin sustainably growing their own food or helping other people to do it.
Yeah, I think you're really right. Good soil, if you buy it, is expensive. And I found in years where I couldn't make my own compost that it was worth buying it. The soil amendment returned itself, I've ran dollars certain years, and like the organic produce that I produced was a, 6 to 8x return. But how much better if we can create that ourselves, regardless of our economic situation, and reduce that cost, and in turn not only create nutrient dense, flavorful vegetables for our family and possibly our community, but steward the land well, enrich the soil, and be building something going forward that is low cost. That's just like, it's a win all the way around. And I keep having this discussion this week, like these methods are not just good for us as homesteaders, they're wins all the way around. They're economical, they're resilience building, they're earth building and community building. So really, really cool. Let's get into details with why you need compost throughout the year. Why is it important to have access to that throughout the year?
Well, it's a really good question, and it kind of goes back to one of the things that we teach in some of our gardening classes we do here on the farm, and that is trying to raise awareness that gardening is not something you do one time a year in the springtime, and then, you harvest it and you put it all up and can it, and then, it's in weeds until next year when you plow it up and you plant it again on Good Friday or whatever the date is, in your particular area. Just helping people understand that, yes, it's great to can, but you can eat, especially in a place like Alabama here, you can eat fresh stuff out of your garden, 12 months of the year. And you may have to put a little cover over it or something like that. But that means that all of a sudden you're planting to get that kind of year-round production. You're planting on almost every season. Or you're starting, in the winter, you might not be, planting as much, but you might be getting mix ready to start seedlings in early. You can use compost for that as well. So compost is something that you're wanting to apply when you plant. You're wanting to top up on plants that have been in the ground for a while. Again, you might want to start seeds with it. You can make compost teas to get rid of fungal diseases and those kind of things. So having a supply year round really expands your options, because when you don't have it, you really have to start resorting to other methods that you might not have to, or you might just, you're wasting your time planting crops that aren't going to yield as much, even though you're putting in the same amount of labor. At the end of the day, if your soil fertility is not as good, then you're getting half as much return.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be challenging. I mean, I'm in North Idaho. I can't grow all year round the way you may be able to in Alabama, but I still need access to compost, like you're saying, to start seeds, to prep different things. And a lot of times I need it when the snow is on the ground. And sometimes I've been challenged with that, because even though I have it, I haven't been able to get to it because I didn't think it through all the way as far as what my spring looked like. So Go ahead.
I was just saying, spring is one of those, it's like we wait for it, then boom, everything needs to happen all at one time. So that's where we have to think as much as possible, what can I do ahead of time? We don't want to be thinking about making compost when it's time to plant, because we're we've already lost that season in terms of doing it, or we're going to have to go spend a lot of money on getting some in. So that's where we'll talk some throughout this about the importance of how much easier it is to think about making compost year round, so that you have compost year round, because it's not a lot of these systems. When you're dealing with living systems, it's not necessarily hard if you work with the systems. Like, it's a process, it's seasonal. If you do things at the right time, they don't take as much time, but you can't just force stuff to happen at your convenience every time.
I like that. If you do things at the right time, it doesn't take as much time. Is that how you said that?
Exactly.
That was good. I want to remember that. Well, what are some of the challenges, and this will lead into how we get this done, but what are some of the challenges with having that compost available to yourself all year long?
Yeah, so it's mainly that because compost is a process, you have to typically think in advance before you either make compost or you need compost. So it means you really, it's not something that's hard to do, but you need to it needs to be on your calendar. It needs to be on your monthly calendar throughout the year where you've thought ahead of time so that, okay, I want to make compost this month, so I have it ready for this season. Means that I need to start collecting what kind of materials could I be collecting up to that point in time, so I would have them ready when I want to make my compost pile. Because you may have one weekend to make compost, or a day set aside, or a week, and then you spend the whole time getting the materials together, and then you're rushed to try to make it, And so having it available year round means that you need to have this year round farming mentality, that you don't like take off your farming hat at some point in time, and you don't think about it again until later, unless you're very intentional about that. Because once, you put it on and the urgency of it is in your face, often the opportunity to do something about it is already behind you.
Yeah, and that's a mind shift for people that are gardening and homesteading and farming that we have to make. We're not as used to today, because so much we can go push a few buttons and get something on the way. And Amazon today Prime just ruined us.
Yes,
in
yes.
our expectation to get a tool, get a thing right now.
And you can do some of that if you have enough money, but the whole idea of homesteading is, we want to learn to do things for ourselves, low cost, minimal cost, and get past that point where you're having to say, well, let me buy some ready-made compost, or let me buy a milk cow that's ready to go, or whatever that we're building in. Because, if you've raised a calf and you've trained it every single day when you're out there milk, all those things, it's not like you have to outlay a ton of money once you get things up and going, but it does take that year-round mentality of giving everything stewardship and attention, 12 months of the year.
And that is really, if you're going to make high quality compost at low cost, that planning really is the challenge. And that got highlighted after we released your class in the school this spring, and we did a composting challenge. The most challenging thing for people was gathering the materials, just the time it took. And so we were doing a challenge. It was something we didn't account for in the school, and giving people enough time to accumulate the materials, because it's something you need to do, like you're saying, I think, throughout the season. So maybe let's start to talk about that, about how do you determine what you need and think about getting it?
Yeah. Well, the materials that we need, we talk about this in the class. We're trying to feed this compost so that when it's finished, it's basically like a really high quality inoculant of the natural fertilizer factory that's in the natural forest or a healthy pasture or anything like that. There's microbes, fungus, and bacteria that live in the soil, and they're breaking down organic matter and they're feeding our plants. So this compost, we don't just want rotten stuff. We're basically providing food for these microbes, having them decompose it to a certain stage so that it's in that ideal kind of between fresh mulch on the top of the ground and completely decomposed underneath, that active zone. That's what we're putting on there. And so when we think about what materials we need, we're thinking, what do the microbes we want to grow want? So one is we want to feed bacteria. They love sugar. So any green plant material, any plant material that's green when we harvest it, is going to be something that will feed those bacteria. And that means if you're wanting to go find green material, if you go out in the fall time or in the winter time, you may not be able to find any because everything's brown, right? You may be able to, some options there might be to get some hay that was cut when it was green. And even though it may be brown, it still has the sugars in it. But there's different. Green material is best in the middle of the growing season or the early growing season when you have lots of grass and vegetation from your garden that you're pulling up after things are done. And then in the fall, with leaves and dried corn stalks or anything that's turned brown after it's kind of finished its growing course, is when we have an abundance of brown material. So that's easy to collect then. And often for me anyways, a lot of my animals are out on pasture during the summertime. So the wintertime is when I'm collecting, if I'm having them in the barn or I'm interact or feeding them someplace, that's when I'm thinking about, okay, well, this would be a good nitrogen source to provide the energy those microbes need to break stuff down. In some parts of the world, they have very limited access to water. And some of us may find ourselves in that kind of situation one day where water is a little bit more valuable in some places than we're used to it being now. And so you may take a little while through rainwater collection or something to collect the 100 gallons, for instance, that you're going to need to make a pile in a couple of drums. And if you do that and you build it into your routine where you're like, what we do is we make stockpiles. So we have a pile, like a stockpile where we put anything that's in the green category, stockpile for brown, stockpile for nitrogen. So that as we're like pulling stuff out of the garden, even today, my son had pulled some stuff out and I said, go take that up to the stockpile, and dump it up there where the green material is. That's just like takes a few seconds, when we're in the middle of like throughout the year to do that here and there, but we've built in that system where we know how to think about it. So it happens automatically. And by the time we get ready to make a compost pile, we're not doing all that work all at one time and scrambling to try to find it. So each season we tend to have access to different kinds of materials, and just having a simple system in place that helps you to know what to do with those materials so that they're useful later on can make it not seem like that, not take a big chunk of time at one point, when like it is when you just take the class and you don't have anything stockpiled.
Right. So instead of the mad dash, like, whoa, I need to get some compost started so I can have it ready in a few weeks for the garden. Like, and this is just a homesteader mentality, right? If you're fixing things on the homestead, if you're doing things with wood or metal, you've got your piles in places you can go draw from, right? I've got several wood piles. I've got several metal piles. You've got ingredients in your pantry because you're going to be fixing certain things over the course of the season. And, if you're like a lot of us, you're stocking up on those in bulk. Really what you're talking about is just doing the same thing, here with your compost material and having the places where you put those aside. So when the material is ready in season, you can have a stockpile. That way it's there for you when you need to make your compost.
Right. And that's one of the key differences with how I teach thermal composting versus what a lot of us kind of do with a static compost in our backyard, where go throw this in the compost pile, go throw it in the compost pile. No, we're not actually putting anything in the compost pile after, except for the time that we build it. And that way we know everything is cured and completely, ready by the time we're going to use it. And we haven't added any fresh material. So if we're just building it once and not adding anything after that, then the question is, where do I put the stuff that I want to compost? And that is, we put it in our stockpile bins.
Right. Can you kind of go over again real quick, browns, greens, and nitrogen particularly, but if we could just do those three in order, that would be great for people here in the audience. Those are the key three things that you're stockpiling.
Right. So the kind of the base ingredients for our compost pile, again, is we're normally doing equal parts brown material and green material. And again, you can see in this picture, our stockpiles. In the middle is our green material. And yes, it doesn't look green, but guess what? That was material we cut on the farm here when it was green. The reason you can feed hay that's brown to cows and they can actually get get energy from it, is because it still has the sugars in the stems and the leaves from when it was cut and it's been dried if it was stored properly. So this is that's why we have separate bins, because you might not know, once it turns brown, was this a brown or a green? As long as you know what it was when it was removed from the plant that it was growing on, then if it was green, it's a green material. Now, these brown leaves that you can see behind me in this photo were raked up from the ground so that we know they were brown when they fell from the tree. Now, if I cut down a fresh tree and it's green and I'm taking them off, it's going to go in the green pile. But those are, if I'm removing something from the garden, if it's brown, like a brown corn stalk, that's going to go in the brown pile. If I'm getting sweet corn and I've got green corn stalks, they're going to go in the green pile. And that way I just accumulate enough. And I'm looking for kind of equal amounts when I actually build the pile. The nitrogen there, we think about separately, and that's going to be either a manure or any plant material from a legume or a nitrogen fixing plant like beans and peas. And that's going to basically provide the energy that the bacteria need specifically in order to get the pile hot. And that's what really helps our pile to be able to kill any weed seeds and pathogens and really be a high quality, consistent product at the end of the day. But that's typically about 20%, 10 to 20% of the pile, depending on whether you're using plant material or animal manure. And then the brown and greens are the bulk of your pile, about 40 to 45% of your pile each.
Yeah. Can you go over a little bit sourcing each of these and what are acceptable sources, and are there anything that are not acceptable? People are asking in the chat about oak leaves and different things, and so good to just preview what's acceptable and if there's anything that's not.
Yes, very good question. Because some materials, some plant materials can either, I had one guy that a friend of mine here in Alabama was asking, he actually put some black walnut hulls and a bunch of black walnut stuff in his pile and was having some problems because of that allelopathic nature of black walnut. Eventually it'll decompose and it doesn't affect everything, but don't, think about if you're putting something, if it's plant material that's like we talk about in the class, if it's kind of like a toxic material, or if it's something like poison ivy or whatever. I mean, you might want to, I wouldn't necessarily recommend those things, but if it's something that, if in some parts of the world, they might have neem from the neem tree, things that have a little bit of a property that they use to protect themselves, you want to keep that to a very small percentage of your pile. So you let the heat from the rest of the material help sterilize that. So keep that in mind as far as especially your brown materials, your green materials. And then obviously we live in a day and age where people use a lot of chemicals, and a big part of what I tend to use for my green material is spoiled hay. Just like I had some hay that got rained on earlier today. Some of that, if the cows don't eat it, I'll use that for compost. However, especially broadleaf herbicides, which are herbicides that are sprayed to kill anything that's not a grass in the pasture, those can often have a residual effect in that. And even though it's composted, it can still have a negative impact on your garden. So I literally went to the farm down the road of my neighbor and, got it from the barn right next to the fields where he gets it out of. And I know exactly, how he, treats that field. So when we're getting materials, if you're getting lawn clippings, for instance, which is another, good material in like an urban setting for green material, that's something that you have to be careful with, just because people will spray a lot of chemicals on there. A lot of times, if you're getting leaves from trees, oak leaves are great. Like you said, somebody was asking about that. We have a lot of oak here in Alabama, and people don't often spray, just trees around. I mean, spraying costs money. So unless people are making money off of some, protecting that tree somehow, if it's fruit trees that were sprayed and their leaves from that, just use common sense and thinking, I don't want to bring things that are super negative into my garden, even via my compost pile. If it's a naturally occurring kind of, like, again, toxic plant, a small percentage of that often can be neutralized with the rest of the material, but keep it to a small percentage. And if it's a chemical, then you want to really be careful, especially with those broadleaf herbicides in something like either grass that was sprayed like hay, or sadly, even the manure from an animal like a horse and an equestrian center where it's like gorgeous grass, and they keep it nice somewhat often through spraying those broadleaf like weed and feeds and stuff on the grass. It'll persist through through the horse, into the manure, through the compost, into your garden, and anything that's not in the grass family can be harmed by it for several years.
Yeah. So know your source. Besides knowing what type of material you're putting in there, know your source the best you can. Can you talk a minute before we move on? There's some other things we want to cover here in the notes as far as like a system. Well, I guess, yeah, here's what I'm going to cover, because I see a lot of chat going on about different composting methods, and you are speaking to a particular type of compost. There's definitely different ways to compost, but you're speaking to a particular way, the way you teach, the way you've taught in the school to help people have consistent, dependable compost in their home. So I think we might need to back up a little bit and just explain the basic method, because that's very relative to what we're talking about in totality here.
Yeah. So what we wanted to bring to the school was a method of composting that's applicable for kind of larger scale, family size homestead gardening, that where the goal of making compost is to produce compost. Often the goal of a compost pile is to have a natural way to get rid of stuff. So how much compost you end up with at the end of the day is not the main objective. It's just to have something useful with your scraps and with other stuff that you're trying to get rid of. And especially on a small urban scale, that's a lot of times, the way we do it. But then when we want to scale up and say, okay, well, I want to grow a 1/4 acre of, a market garden, or I want to grow, a really big garden with my family and have it year after year. Like, how do I consistently create a product that will give me consistent results that I can rely on? Then it really is wise, and I found helpful to come to use thermal composting, and a simple system with thermal composting in order to get that consistent result. So there's several different ways to make compost, which again is just taking organic matter, feeding it to microbes and decomposing it to the point that it's in that rich active stage that typically is between like the fresh leaves of the forest floor and the dirt underneath. That's where the gold is. That's where the activity and the fertilizer is being made. We want that to put, like in our garden, we always remove the mulch, put it right on the dirt, and put the mulch back on, so that we're kind of mimicking that profile in the forest. But there's static composting, means you just throw it in a pile and you let it rot, and it'll do that perfectly fine. The problem is it takes a lot of time. You get somewhat inconsistent results depending on how it's been managed, and it doesn't heat up often to the point that you can make sure that you're killing any weed seeds or pathogens from diseased plants that might have been put in there. Then there's vermicompost, which is really great for a small scale at a really high, which is making it with worms, feeding food scraps, especially to worms and stuff. And in this thermal composting related to food scraps, we don't really recommend this as like the primary go-to for how to get rid of food scraps. You're welcome to, when you build a pile, take the last couple days worth of kitchen scraps and put it, but you don't really want to stockpile food scraps for months out there in a pile. If you do want to do that, you want to put it in like a big pile of wood chips, and then you could add them later. But things like feeding food, we feed food scraps to chickens. You can feed them to worms. You can put them in a biodigester. You can feed them to pigs. We're almost like, every time we have food scraps, I'm like, where am I going to use it? Because I got so many things I can put it in. But vermicompost is a great way to do that. Static compost, but thermal compost is what you really want to think about doing. It's what professionals do for any large scale. Once you kind of want to go to the next level of, I need to actually create a considerable quantity that can be the foundation of the fertility in my farm. And once you see the effects of it, and once you see, after you spend $1,200 on a dump truck load of really, really actually professionally made compost, you realize, that it's worth it to make it. But the key is, once you scale up, you don't want to just be making it up like haphazardly. Let's try this time, this time, this, you want to have a consistent system so that you don't have to think about it. You can just calendar it and you know how to do it. And the goal of what we teach is to give people an extremely low-tech, simple way to make thermal compost that helps remove any of the distractions of things like specialized tools or all those kind of things that, yes, you can do it. You can use chickens to help make it. You can, use machinery. You can turn it with a tractor. But sometimes it's helpful to simplify it so that you can get the key principles that are the important part of that system. And then you can tweak it and add it and go beyond that. But often it's those foundational principles of what actually, is makes the compost. It's not the tractor that makes the compost. It's you as the manager knowing how to manage that process. That's the real secret. And you don't need a tractor to do that. But the goal is not to necessarily say everybody has to do it exactly like we teach it long term. But if you can succeed in a low-tech version of thermal composting, And I still do that same method. I mean, like I just I just stick to that on my own farm, but I'm not saying, but it will give you a foundation for whatever, other ways that you end up, deciding to tweak it or innovate on your homestead.
Well, it also, I think, when you move from figuring out gardening, learning to garden, to working to consistently provide food for your family from the garden, you need some predictability.
Yes.
And so this allows you to kind of predict how much you're going to produce and when, so that you can have it ready when it's ready, whether, and you put those two together, and that becomes very powerful on the homestead when we're looking to build resilience all of a sudden. And again, this is one of these things, you guys, people ask Noah, they ask me, how do you do it all? How do you get all these things done? Well, it's this strategy. It's this thinking. This is why we're talking about this today, because it's this kind of thinking of doing the right composting, the right way, the planning, that allows you then to have what you need and how much you need when it's time to get in the garden, to make sure that you are able to grow those vegetables, that nutrient density, that food resiliency that you want, the way you had planned and hoped to. And that's what I love, Noah, about the way you teach it, because it builds that into it. There's lots of ways to compost, but this builds something that is very, very important for us as homesteaders that are trying to incorporate food resiliency and health into our life. And you can depend on this, and you can repeat it over and over. So how do we, what's the best system? What's the best way to approach this, to making sure we have compost when we need it? What is it that we need to be thinking about and doing then?
Yes. So for my farm, we have a good, we have a spring season, we have fall season in terms of our main planting seasons. And so what I'm typically thinking is I want to have a kind of a fall season and a spring season where I'm making compost. I'm making a certain, whatever compost I feel like I need for that second half of the year, I'm making it in the first half of the year, so that, right now my son was planting out in our fall garden, and he's using the compost we made in the spring. Probably some of this compost that's maybe even in this photo right here. And then this fall, we're going to be making compost October, November, and that will be ready and sitting there and aging, so that first thing in the spring, when we're ready to have it, then it's had that time. With the thermal composting method, one of the nice things is it's fast because of the heat, fast relatively speaking. So like 8 weeks, you can use the compost. So that means if you think, okay, well, if you want to cut it close, I need, first, in April is when I need my compost. So back up March, February, I need to be thinking about at least starting it then, if you're able to in your climate, maybe start in a some covered area if you need to. You don't have to make compost outside. It can be under a shed. It can be in a barn. And so for some of you that want to maybe say, my downtime is in the winter, that's something to think about. Don't schedule making compost when you don't have time to do it. Find those gaps where, you want to be able to put your whole heart and soul and mind and enjoy the process. Like, it's fun to make compost. It's fun to, figure it out and watch the process and see it heat up and turn it. It's really not fun when you know what you're supposed to do and you don't have time to do it, and you just watch it sitting out there as you walk by it, or drive by it, and you think, man, I should be turning that, but I just don't have time right now. So that's part of how we want to learn with our whole homestead, is like, how can we build out the season with all these different tasks that it's going to take to do what we are attempting to do on our homestead, so that we can pick the right seasons to do that. So figure out, you need at least 8 weeks before you want to plant. Before that, you need to allocate, a certain amount of time to collect your materials. And then if you can shift that back even further to kind of put it in the window of, time that fits well with the rhythm of your seasons. Compost can easily be made, in your off seasons, if you're enough ahead of time of doing that. So late winter with, for your spring stuff, or late in fall for your spring stuff. And And yeah, so that'd be like late winter. You could even start some so that you could have it in the fall, and then in the light fall you could have some, start it for your spring kind of stuff. And that's the key. The key to having compost year round is to make sure that you make enough, that you have how much you need for the space that you're gardening, ideally to be generous with it, not just stingy, and that you actually do it. That's the key. Like, you've got to actually make it. So that's part of the planning, is being realistic. A lot of us, when we first get into this, we are extremely optimistic about time budgeting. Like we're setting up our homestead where it's going to require 500 hours a week to actually accomplish the tasks on our to-do list, and then we get a little bit stressed out. So be realistic about giving yourself some grace and margin so that you can have fun with it and actually like have the space to, especially if it's something new. I want to talk a little bit about just the idea that, especially when you're starting out, or you're, part of the fun of all this when you're learning is the idea of innovating and education and learning stuff and coming up with, how you want to do composting and researching composting and all that. The point is, though, you have to eventually move out of that stage, because you can't be innovating composting, innovating gardening, innovating, like thinking outside the box and all over this stuff with everything all the time. You can't actually keep track of that much. You've got to have seasons where you innovate, you do some research, maybe you find an existing system that was developed over a long period of time, or you spend a long period of time developing your own system with a combination of different systems. But eventually you need to systematize it so that your brain can go somewhere else. And you can actually put that creative energy into something else. And I just know composting's on the calendar. I have a system. It's when I'm supposed to turn it. It's on the calendar. When I'm making it, I don't have to think about it anymore unless I'm looking at my to-do list for the week on whether this is the week I was scheduled to do something for it. And there's a relief of just being able to enjoy doing the work when you can eventually get a good system. And the quickest way to jumpstart a lot of this stuff is starting not by innovating everything from scratch, but by finding a system that's as close as possible to what you would like to do that matches your context, and copying it exactly like the person who has the garden that you like, or does the composting like you like. Copy their system as much as possible, and you'll benefit from their years of innovation. And then all you'll have to do is just tweak the few things that don't actually work in your context that you've got to customize. And that's a big part of what we have a passion to do in terms of teaching this composting. Is we've had the luxury of other people's experience of trying it ourselves for a decade and all this kind of stuff. And you may not have that much time. You may not want to spend that much time. You may want to go ahead and reap the results of what we've kind of learned over those years right away. And some people, in some parts of the world where they depend on this for their survival, they don't have a decade just to kind of do some R&D before they come up with a good system. They kind of need the lasagna recipe without going to culinary school first.
Gosh, that's the point of the School of Traditional Skills, and having these conversations and having these classes where you guys can benefit from what Noah learned, what he spent traveling, to Africa and different places and teaching and developing, and all of our instructors. That's the point, is to accelerate that journey. And, Justin Rhodes said something last night about systems and smoothifying. I like the word smoothify your systems before you move on to other systems. And part of that smoothifying is learning from somebody else and get it down. There's lots of ways to compost, but if you want reliable, predictable compost, and when it's going to be ready for you and how much, then you need a particular system for that. Smoothify that system, learn it, master it. Then, like Noah was saying, you can take it and tweak it and do different things to fit your situation. I think that's very important to do that, and to leave that room, like you're saying, Noah, that space for planning and thinking things through. Talk to us about, and you guys will answer questions here in a little bit about some of the specifics. And of course, Noah's class is where he goes through in detail, step by step, how to compost this particular way. But we'll answer as many questions as we can in this little bit. But one of the other elements here in planning is making your compost, like you're saying, when you have time. And I live in North Idaho. I saw somebody asking about, can you make it when it's cold? I've made it in the barn breezeway in Idaho when it's negative degrees, because I had all my materials. So it gets its heat going, and it works fine if you're protecting it from the elements and not letting it get buried in 2 foot of snow. But once you get that compost done, you may be ready to use it right away, but it may work for you to make it in a certain season. And then you need to actually stockpile the compost to be ready for fall or spring or whenever. Can you talk to us a little bit about stockpiling the compost and storing it, what you need to know or do?
Yeah. So the main thing you got to think about with your compost is that it's a living fertilizer factory that, again, is like copying that active zone in the soil that provides a lot of the release of nutrients between the organic matter coming down on top and the minerals underneath. And so as we are like, part of the reason that it we're only at like the key, if you watch the class, or if you're making your own compost thermally, one of the things that you have to tweak and adjust, that's the most, one of the things that's kind of part of the art of it, is how much nitrogen that you add of the nitrogen source that you have. What kind of manure do you have? What kind of nitrogen source? Because that's what provides the energy for the bacteria to break down the material. If you add too much of it, they'll break it all down into almost nothing before it actually gets cool enough to put on your garden. If you don't add enough, they won't have any energy to break it down hardly at all or very quickly. But if you follow those general ratios of about 20% and like we give, then generally after about halfway through the process, it starts to cool, and then the fungus move in for the last few weeks. And at the end of 8 weeks, you don't have fully composted stuff, but you have something that now the bacteria have run out of that energy. So they're kind of idling, and you have this nice, not fully decomposed, just in that kind of partially decomposed state, teeming with microbes that are just surrounded by this food source. And we want to make sure that we don't damage the life in that compost before we put it onto our gardens. So it's keeping your compost pile in contact with the ground for storing it is a really great way. You can just store it outside. It's not like we're leaching nutrients out of it, because the nutrients will be released by the microbes. It's a fertilizer factory. It's not fertilizer. That's something we really emphasize. And so we just keep our piles out, outside. We want to make sure that we don't allow them to get too saturated, because we want the microbes to be able to breathe in there. So if we have a particularly really wet, rainy season, then we might want to, put some kind of covering like over it. We try not to cover it with plastic, because that can also harm if you put it snug, like a plastic covering right over your compost pile, you could suffocate it and cause some bad anaerobic or bacteria that thrive in the lack of oxygen to multiply there. So storing it, the key element is make sure that we're not putting it in a bag, and we're not putting it in a box where air can't get to it. We want it to breathe. And the nice thing is it will age, but it doesn't really necessarily go bad. You can still use it if it's 6 months old, if it's just the day that it's, finished as far as the end of the 8 weeks. But pay attention to making sure that it doesn't get overly wet. And that if one of the things I've had problems with is if I don't use it right away, some of the ones we had, Josh, there that you were looking at, we were kind of under the trees. The trees will grow right up into that compost pile with all their roots.
They like it.
Really, they love it. So we were digging one of them up, one of our oldest piles, and man, it was full of tree roots. So pay attention to, if it's near trees, you might want to kind of make sure they're not growing up in it before you use it. But again, it doesn't go bad, but it's alive. So make sure that's plenty of, air, that you're not storing it in a plastic container. If you do want to move it or transport it, put it in a wooden box, a paper sack, something that can breathe, so that you're not damaging those microbes. Because otherwise you're going to add just organic matter to your soil, but not the fertilizer factory, because all the microbes that you worked so hard to, propagate will have kind of died off.
Yeah. And that's really the other great thing I like about your method, is that you're not just creating fertilizer. You're not just creating 100% finished compost. You're creating this fertilizer factory. And I think that's much closer to mimicking nature, which is what we're often trying to do in our systems of good regenerative stewardship of the land, is mimicking nature. And that's different than what a lot of people are doing when they're talking, even thermal methods. They're breaking it down to a black humus method. And that certainly works, but I really like the way you approach this. And so you guys, that one of the big points here, right, is that there are certain methods, there are certain ways of doing things that work for our goals as homesteaders, our goals as making this work in the modern life, of trying to steward the land well, of trying to provide nutrient dense food that's predictable, and it takes specific methods and specific steps. And Noah has developed one that I just think works great, and it's a great way to learn. You can take what you're learning here. You also might want to take Noah's class. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Obviously, we have so much time, and I want to make sure we get to some Q&A and some giveaways. So I do want to tell you how you can own this session if you'd enjoyed it, and all of the summit. There are definitely replays, which you can grab, that will be available during the summit, but we can't leave those up forever. So we do have a way that you can own the summit and all of the copies. You can come back to them. You can refer them. You can download so that you have them on your computer, even when you don't have internet. You just want that security. We're also this year doing something new that I haven't seen done before, and that is we are creating what's called a summit guide. This is going to be a 100-page booklet, very thick magazine, very well produced, not just for digital download. You'll have that option, but for our annual and lifetime members, we're going to be able to send that to you and get you a physical copy where we're taking all the highlights of the summit, all the tips, the quotes, the recipes, and a lot of beautiful imagery, and putting it together in this wonderful guide. To me, it's like a thick coffee table magazine that's just going to be inspirational, besides another way to absorb the knowledge and take it in from this summit. And so we want to be able to give that to you, along with the recording from last year's summit, which was a very different style and very, very valuable in and of itself. And we want to be able to give that to you as a download as well. And so we're offering that to you free when you join the School of Traditional Skills during this summit. Because during the summit, we're not only going to give those things to you for free, we're going to give access to the school for the lowest price of the year. And so by joining the school as an annual membership, you're going to get ownership of these things at the lowest price. There is a monthly option. I'll tell you about all that in a moment. But I want to invite you to join the school. First of all, we're talking about compost here. Noah's class is there, where we walk you through detail, step-by-step, the method that we're talking about here. And you're going to learn very quickly how to, as I threw out that word early, smoothify your composting system to make it reliable and predictable and high quality. And this is really representative of all of our classes in whatever subject we're talking about. Whether it's gardening classes, like the composting, or Brian Lowell's raised bed classes, or Melissa K. Norris we'll be talking to in a couple of days. All these classes are geared to take you through step-by-step, a subject, a skill, with enough time to help you become very proficient at it, but not so much time that we're wasting your time and that we're just doing filler to make it look like a big giant class. We don't need to do that. We want to distill information so that you can use it and you can put it to work for you as quickly as possible, get your system down, and move on to the next skill. A lot of people are wanting to build skills right now. They feel a sense of urgency. YouTube just isn't cutting it. Mr. Google Pants isn't cutting it. And School of Traditional Skills is a place where we can take you on that journey from raising your own food to growing it, to preserving it, to cooking it, to a whole lot of other subject matter that we're building to take you on that journey and help you develop skills. Sorry, I lost my mouse here. The other kicker, the other thing that's really great that we released this year is the online community that goes with the school, where you can join other folks like yourself, folks just like folks that are here in this chat. You folks, we have a membership that is it's 8,500, 9,000 strong right now, where people are coming together. They're going through things like the compost challenge that we talked about. This fall here in October, we're starting one where we're going to help you build your herbal medicine cabinet for cold and flu season. And we're going to do that together as a community, learning together, building resiliency together. And then you guys have the conversation where you're learning these things and you have access to other people that are learning the same things in their different places, and you can share that knowledge. Our team can help you along. Our instructors come in after a class gets released and you get member only access to ask questions about the classes. It never stops in adding value. We're adding a class about once a month. The community is growing. We're planning to add an app this year for easier access and better engagement. And you're going to learn the true skills that translate to your life, just like the skills some of our members have gained. Andrea, who built a compost pile like we're talking about and turned it and had it just come out beautifully and perfect. And Alyssa Marie followed through the sourdough class to make beautiful loaves of bread. These are just a couple examples where we're taking people from no knowledge to success and proficiency. And if this is something you're interested in, this community, this set of classes that's going to help you on your journey, that's going to be there to back you up, that's going to be there to give you answers when you need them, that you don't have to go surfing around everywhere, then I want to invite you to join right now during the summit. We're giving you 33% off. It's the lowest price of the year. We can't do this very often because it's a pretty low price for the value. And, it's a value of $195. And every one of our classes is worth that. We've got members in here, and I'm hoping some of you members that have been with us for a year will give a shout out and to the value and what you're learning. $195 hardly gets you through a trip to the grocery store these days. You're going to save that money in just 1 year. I guarantee it. So much so that you've got 30 days to look at it, absorb as much content as you can. And if you don't think it's worth it, we'll give you your money back. But let me share with you a couple of our members' testimonials. Pamela, who's been with us here for a year and says it's absolutely worth it. She's re-upping for the second year. Pamela, we're excited to have you back, and thank you. And Amber as well. Amber was processing her first ever batch of meat chickens, first time. And thanks to the School of Traditional Skills for teaching me the skills and giving me the confidence to increase my family's food independence. And that said so well for what my point and Carolyn's point in founding the school is. It's to give people confidence as quickly as possible so that you can develop health, freedom, and security for yourself, for your family, and your community. So I want to invite you to join the school. Click the link below, check it out. You don't have to leave the chat right now. It'll open another window, and I just encourage you to check that out and check out and sign up and get in there right now. And look at right there. Lisa says, I signed up. I was just going to say, how many of you here are just signing up? And the school started just a year ago. And in fact, today is the 12th. We started on September 12th last year. It's 1 year today. Very, very exciting. And I'm seeing some of our members in here chiming in. Thank you, you guys. You just, it's just so wonderful to be on this journey with everybody. Patricia just joined. Joy, the window is just below. There's a link on the page if you scroll a little bit. While you guys are doing that and checking out that offer, I want to do a giveaway here. And we can thank Redmond for this. Redmond is giving away a $500 gift card. And you're already entered by being here and being a part of the summit. So I just need my moderators to bring up and give me the winner, and I will announce that. And then we're going to get on to some questions and a few more giveaways while you guys are checking out the school. Let's see here. All right, where'd it go? Looking on my screen over here. Okay, so this is Cheryl. Cheryl, you have won. We don't have Cheryl's last name, but it's Cheryl's Healthy Habits. I love that. That is kind of your moniker there online, I think. Cheryl's Healthy Habits. You have won that $500 Redmond gift card. Go check that out. If you're not very familiar with Redmond, make sure and watch their 2 sessions today, and you're going to learn a whole lot about where you can use Redmond products on your homestead. And like I said earlier, I've been using Redmond for 17 years and very, very valuable to my homestead. So congratulations, Cheryl. All right, let's jump in and answer some questions. Noah, you're ready to go? There's a lot of questions. We're going to get to as many as we can here. Couple couple people asked, can you use pine shavings in your compost?
Yes, I definitely use pine shavings as far as mostly as a from my chicken brooder. A lot of times I'm raising chicks. And so I am using, that as kind of a way to absorb that nitrogen in from the manure from the chicks. And then that's coming in as kind of a carbon brown material there to, as a lot of times it's not enough to factor it in if it's from the nitrogen material. But yeah, a lot of times if you're bringing in wood chips or you have a source of that or wood shavings, then yeah, you can add that to your brown.
Very good. David asked, do you need to sterilize compost, like putting it in a black bag in the sun or something?
Yes. Well, that would only be a good idea if you're wanting to put dead compost, or like if you have something that's very toxic and you're wanting to kill it. But at that point in time, it would be just organic matter or whatever material there, and it wouldn't have anything living in it. The whole point of compost is that we want it to be alive, and the life in that compost is actually going to help prevent any negative pathogens or anything that might be toxic, because of it has the proper balance. A lot of, for instance, an example of how this works is in a healthy chicken house that has a deep litter bedding system. It's the life once, if you have fresh shavings that are sterile, a lot of times you'll have a higher mortality of your chickens that live on that because pathogens can live in that bedding. But once that bedding gets rich enough and is enough of a living community, those chickens actually are a lot healthier on it. And that's kind of like compost is. So I wouldn't sterilize your compost. The heat of thermal compost will get hot enough to kill pathogens and to actually kill weed seeds. So it's self sterilizing as far as negative things without harming the life. And actually, one of the things that we do in learning when's the best time to turn our compost is we monitor the heat to make sure that we don't allow it to get so hot that it starts killing off the good bacteria. So we're actually trying to prevent the complete sterilization of that pile in the way that we manage it.
Yeah, that's something they do industrially. And one of the things you got to be careful about buying compost is because a lot of times it has been sterilized. And I mean, depending on where it's coming from, that might be a good thing, right? But that's not what we want for our compost that we're making at home. And I'm glad you brought up the deep bedding and the chickens, because Harvey Ussery takes you through that. And for some of you members as well, if you haven't seen that yet, check out Harvey Ussery's class on chickens, because he goes all through the deep bedding that Noah is talking about. And that is a wonderful system for both managing chickens and creating material for your compost. Stephanie asked, when you can't grow all year round, is it better to add your compost in the fall or the spring?
That's a really great question. And what I would say is the sooner you can get compost on your garden, the better. And I would put it on in the fall and the spring. But if I had a choice, I would put it on in the fall. And the way that we do a minimal tillage approach, similar to the Back to Eden method that's taught in the School of Traditional Skills. So what we're always adding the compost on top of the dirt, what your natural soil is, and covering it with mulch of some type, leaves or grass mulch. And what that does is it protects the microbes and allows that compost to be active where it has enough moisture in it and it's not exposed to the sunlight. That way all the microbes can wake up. They start decomposing the mulch on top. They start interacting with the native microbes that are in the soil. And by the time springtime comes around, you'll have it kind of already going in a way that will give you a jump start on the season versus not applying that until you plant.
Yeah, very good. Tammy asks, can you compost in plastic totes?
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to compost. The plastic totes would definitely need to be very aerated, in my opinion, to be able to do that well, because most for the way we normally approach compost as being a living thing. So there are trash can composting methods where you drill a bunch of holes in a trash can and you put stuff in it. And so I'm not here to address every single composting method out there. And I'm not here to necessarily limit everybody from, experimenting with those kind of things. But I do want to bring some key principles, which is you want your compost to be living. So we don't want to, suffocate it. We want to make sure that oxygen is present, because the kind of bacteria that we want to break down our compost is aerobic bacteria. And that means they have to breathe oxygen. And we don't want it decomposed by anaerobic bacteria. Aerobic bacteria, the kind that breathe oxygen that we want, that's what's breaking it down, the nice soil in the forest. And when you smell it, it's not stinky, right? It smells good. It smells earthy. It smells rich and healthy, even though it's rotting material, right? But anaerobic is the stinky, slimy kind of rotting, that tends to happen when something is sealed and closed up and has no air getting into it. Kind of like, food in a Ziploc bag and that's been left out too long. It's just, it's horrible. And that will produce byproducts of different acids and stuff that can be negative to our garden, or alcohols and stuff. So we don't want to, we want to avoid with any method that we're doing, going anaerobic with our compost.
Right. Okay. Mrs. Knudsen asks, how far away from buildings should your compost piles be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we talk about locating a pile. And what I really tend to think about is, do I have an easy way to bring the materials that I'm going to stockpile? Am I going to be able to bring this easily to where I'm going to use it? And most likely, you're asking about, is it going to smell? Is it nasty? That kind of thing. And what I would say is, if you're bringing some fresh manure to make your compost with, it might have a bit of a smell. But within a week, once you put it in your compost pile will it will not smell bad unless something is dreadfully wrong, typically because it's been smothered somehow. I've never seen anybody that's done it like we've taught it, that it's ever smelled bad when they built it. And so that means we put it right, where it's convenient, even sometimes right close to where we are all the time. And other than making sure that it's not close as far as being too inconvenient, just because of the scale, sometimes you need to bring in water, and it can be a bit messy with just water when you're making it, and be a bit muddy. The smell wouldn't be an issue. You could put it right up next to any living area. And other than just right at the beginning, if you're bringing in fresh manure, you really won't expect any smell, any negative smell there at all.
I think homesteaders are having to learn to use their noses in a new way. The sense of smell keeps coming up in these discussions, and how much our nose is our guide, and people have a hard time trusting their noses. But it is a very good guide in the homesteading life to help us understand if we're on the right track or not.
It is. There's
so many things. Christina is asking, sorry, this is very, very small on my screen. We don't plan on growing a bunch of plant-based food. I'm interested primarily in medicinal plants for the family and animals. I would love to make compost with our chicken and goat droppings, but we'll probably have more than we could use in a garden. What other things can I use it for?
Yes. Well, I've never run out of uses for it on the farm, because soil is the foundation of, a healthy homestead. Even if you're, growing animals, the soil itself is the foundation of the feed that they're going to be eating. So yes, if you've completely exhausted putting it around any fruit trees you have, any herbs that you have, any plants that you're growing specifically for yourself, and you're harvesting from, that's why compost is important as something that you put back from plants that you're harvesting something from, because you're removing things from the site. So specifically, I would focus on anything that you're harvesting stuff from on a regular basis. Prioritize having your compost to top that up each year. But then after that, any spot on your in your pasture, or any area that you want to increase the the health of that for your animals, compost is a great way to, spread it out there and improve the forage for your animals as well. And a little bit can go a long way just by bringing in that microbial life that can really help with the, any of the plants that are growing out there that on land, especially that might have been damaged in the past.
Yeah, and I would add as a broad principle, as stewards of the land, applying regenerative principles, homesteading methods, we don't want bare ground really anywhere that we can help it. I mean, your driveway maybe, but even that should have rocks or something on it so it doesn't erode. So if you're not using that land very specifically for something, you want something growing on it. You want ground cover. Therefore, you've got lots of opportunity to use compost, even on a small piece of property.
And if you have plenty and you can't use it all, it would be a great way to make some friends.
Yeah, give it away. There you go. I like that. I don't know anybody that wouldn't want some living, nutrient-rich, microbe-rich compost. Susan asks, if I don't have animals to get manure, what do I do?
That's a great question. Well, you have a couple options. One is you can partner with somebody that does have some. And secondly, you can grow, if you have space, you can grow some of your own nitrogen through growing cover crops or plants that are nitrogen fixing, like beans and peas and clovers and those kind of things, and harvesting that material. And then that actually can be your nitrogen source. A lot of times, if you look in your local area, I don't know where you live, but there are plants like locusts or locust trees, or in our area, we have even kudzu and red buds or mimosa trees. Sometimes they're what we would consider invasive species. A lot of those are nitrogen fixing plants that you can harvest, and they can provide the nitrogen for your pile. You just have to have 20% of your pile be that material if you're using a plant-based material, because it's not as potent as a manure. If you're using manures, it's only going to be about 10% of your pile. So yeah, you can grow it yourself, but a lot of this sourcing is starting to think about looking for these materials, and you'll be surprised. You can almost always find all these materials for free if you know the right people and can tap into what would otherwise be their waste. So that principle of resources come from right relationships. So much of this homesteading is invest in people, invest in networks, invest in community, because that at the end of the day is where a lot of your success is going to come from.
Yeah, very, very good. Hey, I want to do a giveaway here for just a minute. We're giving away one of Noah's books, Born Again Dirt, and a compost thermometer. Very excited to do that. Moderators, if you can drop me a winner. Hey, look at that. They're quick. And if you're here, don't worry. You didn't have to enter anything. You were already entered by being here. And the winner is Brian Clapp. Brian Clapp, you have won. We're going to send you Noah's book and a compost thermometer. And so you're committed now. You got that thermometer. You're going to have to build a compost pile if you haven't yet. And I hope you'll join us at the school, and Noah will guide you through step by step, every step of the way. Anyways, make sure and email in and claim your prize so we can get the information to send those things to you. Moving on so we can get to as many questions as possible. A whole bunch of people are asking, can a compost pile catch fire?
That's a very good question.
Big concern for a lot of people.
Yes. Well, just long and short, I've never heard of a compost pile that caught fire. Maybe there was one that I don't know of, but in terms of all the methods that we use, I've never heard of that. So the compost that we make, when we build a pile, it actually it uses typically about 100 gallons of water for a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot pile, because we're dunking the material and we're putting it on there. And the rapidity with which it heats up with the kind of microbes that thrive in a wet environment and that kind of thing, you'll see some steam coming off your pile. But it's, that is definitely an issue with hay, and grasses that have been cut that have this specific level of moisture in them and all that. But it's never been a concern, to my understanding, with anybody that's ever made compost that I've ever heard of.
I've sure never heard of it. And Noah, between the two of us, we have talked to a lot of people and had a lot of mentors around the world. And so I've never heard of that happening. I know people are scared of that, but I think you can put that one to rest. Here's a list of things that people are asking if they can compost. And so it's one of the things I see in the chat is just like this. So I'm going to go through a few things. You can just give us a yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down. Or, if you need to give a side note to it, great. Can you compost black walnut tree trimmings?
Again, that's something that a friend of mine just had some problems with. One of the things we looked up is there's some plants that it doesn't seem to harm that much and some that it does more. So look up some articles on the effects of black walnut in particular with the crops that couldn't name off the top of my head the particular compound that's in black walnut that's harmful, but it some things you might have to worry about it with more than others. The biggest key is don't do the nuts, don't do the big chunky stuff or the roots, and keep it to a very small percentage of your pile. I would not do it as a large percentage of the pile.
Right. How about lawn clippings?
Yes, lawn clippings are great as long as you're careful that they don't have some kind of chemicals sprayed on them.
Juglone. That's the compound.
Yes, that it is.
Something like that. Yeah. Okay. How about meat, fish, etc.? Can you compost those things?
Yes, you definitely can. The things you're going to run into, though, is the key ingredients that I'm talking to you about with green, brown, and nitrogen. Those are the engine for your pile. That's your main pile that's going to get hot, and that's what you want to have as the majority of your pile. If you want to run other things through it, you can run soil amendments through it, and they'll be more effective. You can run, a certain percentage of animal slaughter scraps or whatever when you build the pile. But it needs to be a small percentage of the pile, and then the rest of the pile cooking will actually help decompose that. But if you get to too high a percentage, you're going to start getting a little bit off. As far as a lot of animals, what I typically recommend and do is if you have a cage with some wood chips in it, a cage being like to keep animals out, you can bury those meat scraps or whatever in wood chips where they can kind of decompose a bit and kind of stabilize. And then later when you build your thermal compost pile, if you want to run that through at whatever stage it's at that point in time, then you can do that.
Exactly what we do. Yep. Garden material after you've harvested, can you add that to your compost pile?
Yes. And that's one of the great things about thermal is because you're getting the heat, you can take those diseased, blighted tomato vines. You can take things that you would otherwise might want to be careful about recycling through your garden. And because it's going to go through that heat, it'll turn it into something that's safe to bring back into the garden. But yeah, that's why I really like having the composting area right next to the garden, just like all the brassicas from the spring that my son pulled up earlier this week. He was able to just take it in the wheelbarrow right over to the green stockpile.
Okay. Duck bedding. Use duck bedding, obviously, kind of like the chickens and whatnot, I assume.
Yeah, definitely. That would be great. And just as a note for the manures, typically the bigger the animal or the smaller the animal, the more potent the manure. So if I'm using chicken manure, it won't take quite as much. If I'm using cow manure, it might take a little bit more than chicken manure, just because the larger the animal, the more kind of diluted the nitrogen levels are in that manure. And if you have bedding in it, then, a lot of times I can kind of, if I have a heavy bedding, like a lot of bedding with some chicken manure in it, a lot of times that and cow manure act kind of as the same, because the chicken manure is diluted a bit in the bedding and the cow manure is, already diluted a little bit because of larger animal. And then you can still kind of use them in the same quantities when you bring them in.
Right. Oak leaves.
Yes, you can use oak leaves. I've used a lot of them and haven't seen any issue with the tannins or anything like that.
Cool. There's some interesting ones here. I'm just going to say, and you kind of covered this a little bit, kitchen scraps. I mean, I've got leftover rice from Indonesia. I don't know, but it kind of goes into the kitchen scraps in general, and.
Yeah. So again, with kitchen scraps, they're not, they can be run through a thermal compost pile, but they're not good to provide any of the key ingredients in a compost pile. I would highly recommend you using those valuable, because they're really valuable as far as things you can do with them. You can feed them to black soldier flies, create protein for your chickens. You can feed them to your chickens directly. You can feed it to pigs. You can feed them to a methane digester and make fertilizer and natural gas. There's all sorts of other cool things that I would recommend that you consider doing with the kitchen scraps that you produce.
Yeah. How about cardboard? And I'm going to add paper in general so that people, so we kind of cover this in a base, for people. Cardboard and
Yeah,
paper.
you definitely can do that. You'll just have to take into account, other materials that might be in there, with it, that like the tape that you have to remove, or any staples and those kind of things. And if you probably don't want the heavy, glossy, inky kind of paper. You want it to be kind of a natural paper. But I know some people in town, they'll take, big mounds of, shredded, recycled, paper from different places. And sometimes that's a great source of brown material in a city environment.
I don't know where this person lives. This is very unique, but it's so fun. I'm going to say it, even though I don't think it's applicable to most people. Coconut core. Do you know how to say that? Core with turtle poo.
Man, I would love to try that.
It's a new one to me. I love it. Wherever you're at, you live in a cool location. If that's the materials that you're accumulating.
Yes. Please email me how that works. But I would basically think, my understanding with that coconut, I know the word, I don't know how to pronounce it well. So it probably is a brown material, because it probably is a bedding, and then obviously the manure. So what I would do is I would treat it as a nitrogen and stockpile it that way. And you'll just have to do some experiment to see how potent that and the turtle poo works.
Yeah, love it. Hey, man, you got it. It's a resource. Use it. Pine needles, big one, of course. I hear this over the years. You probably do too. How do you handle pine needles?
Yeah, so pine needles, they are really great because they have a bit of that kind of lignin in them that keeps them from decomposing. They're a little bit, on the woody side. And that, one of the things we want to have in our pile that I talk about in the class is woody material. And that means chunky kind of stuff that's not going to decompose fully by the end of the pile, so that it kind of gives some skeletal structure to the pile to keep it from slumping. It's kind of like if you have fine coffee grounds, it can compact really well. But if you have some chunky stuff mixed in with it, then it really will help to keep that from getting that way. So pine needles can provide some of that structure for your pile. They will not break down as rapidly as the other stuff. So they're one of those ingredients that I would keep to a minimum percentage. You're not going to just like have them as half your pile and really see, as much success as you are with regular grasses or leaves. Yeah.
This one's coming up a lot, and I like people's thinking. Curious your take on this, but it's a resource people have, and that is dog, and I will add cat poo. This person in my notes is saying dried in the sun, so they're thinking a little bit ahead. But a lot of people just want to know: can you compost that dog and cat poo that you accumulate on your homestead?
Yes, I mean, people will compost their own poo as well. So you just have to understand that if there's animals that might have parasite issues, or especially a lot of our pets nowadays, people are getting better at this, but the diet that they have and what you're feeding them is going to impact the quality of what comes outside the other end. So that would be something just to take into consideration. But I don't have any experience with it. I know that some people try to avoid those kind of things, but I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head any reasons why. I would just be, if you're using human manure or other kind of things, I'm not going to put it around, or even animal manure like pet manure. I might be careful not to put that right around certain. I might put it around my fruit trees, not necessarily around my lettuce, and understand different uses where, as far as where the source material is coming from.
Yeah, especially until you really get it down. I'd say that's advanced. People do that. People that know what they're doing and know how to break everything down. It all goes back to nature and breaks down, right? So if we know whatever is in it is safe for the soil, we can get there. But certain things like that, I think, are a little more advanced. Smoothify your system, learn Noah's class, get it down to where you're confident, and then add in some of those things that are maybe pushing the edge for our modern mentality. But I love the mentality of using up the resources we have. It's a waste. Nature does not waste anything. It reuses everything. And in mimicking nature, we can learn to do the same thing. We just have to learn how to do it the right way in our context.
Yeah. And the main thing we just have to watch out for is whenever we're dealing with anything that's maybe like the more unnatural something is, then the more careful we have to be. So, you know, when you have pets that are being fed certain things or people that are taking certain medications, and all, like we're dealing with, you know, sources that, you know, might not be as natural as they might be in other contexts. And we just have to take that into account so that we aren't, you know, having a natural system, but we have some unnatural input into it that's messing it up. And just be careful about that.
Yeah. All right. We're going to do last giveaway and one or two more questions. We'll wrap up here. We are giving away an STS lifetime membership. You guys, it's hard to even put a value on that right now. If we sell that on the website, that is at least $1,500. And I think that's a steal in and of itself. For the value that's there to have lifetime access, no matter how big this school grows, no matter how much we ever add as a lifetime member, you're always there. You always have access to it. And Brenda McCarran, you have won a lifetime access to the School of Traditional Skills. Welcome to the tribe. Look forward to seeing you there. Make sure and email hello@schooloftraditionalskills.com. so that they can get you all set up and get you access. And let's see, let me look for one more question here. There's a lot here, guys. You're going to have to come over and jump into the school where you can continue this conversation because we just can't cover everything. Let's see here. Let's see. Going to go just to a foundational one here. Jan is asking, are leaves considered brown or green? And this is one that I feel like we get over a lot. And so let's just help clarify that before we go.
Yeah. And don't feel bad. That is a big question that a lot of people have. And it's eventually you'll kind of get the concept down. So we're not afraid to repeat it. But a green material is any plant material, a leaf or a grass, that was green when it was removed from the plant. So if those leaves were green when they were taken from the tree, they qualify as a green material. If the leaves were brown when they fell from the tree, they qualify as a brown material because they don't have the sugars in it anymore. They just are a carbon source, which will be great for your fungus. So leaves can be brown or green depending on when you collect them.
Very, very good. Noah, thanks for sharing your knowledge. You guys, this has been a great 2 days. Thanks for hanging with us. Some of you, I think, have been to every session. We're going to kick it off tomorrow with Shannon Hayes on kitchen efficiency. My wife, Carolyn, is going to be talking tomorrow on getting 3 meals to the table every day. So a real focus here on taking a lot of these things that you're doing out on the land and making it efficient and doable to get this nutrient-dense food, whether it's animals, plants, fruit, whatever it is we're trying to grow. It's a whole nother skill to get it onto the table every day. No, I know your wife knows that. My wife knows that. I know a lot of you either know that or you're working to figure it out. So it's going to be really, really cool. And then tomorrow evening for the session, we've got a round table. Get to have Noah back, Adam Martin back from Be Kept, and Sean and Beth Doherty. This is going to be a fun round table. I'm just going to field questions. Your guys' questions, make them good ones. Show up and make them good, valuable questions for everybody. I'm going to field them out to Noah, Adam, Sean, and Beth, and we're going to have a good time. So I hope you guys will make it there tomorrow. Remember, there are replays for you that will be in the email. But look, you want to own it. You want to become a part of the community. Jump into the school while we've got this discount going. And, come join us and just get into the flow and start building skills regularly, not just here and there. So thanks for being here, Noah. So thanks so much for taking your time again to come hang out with us. As always, it's just fun to talk to you. You've got lots of great knowledge and experience, and I know this was a help to everybody here. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so grateful to be a part of this whole community. I really appreciate it, Josh.
All right, you guys. See you all tomorrow.